Hey there, guys. Thank you for joining me today. So, for my final project, I decided to work on creating a podcast, which I entitled Now What? For this show, I hope to explore life after graduating from college through weekly interviews with current and recent graduates. So, you graduated from college. Now what? A question that can be daunting for many recent or soon to be graduates. This podcast seeks to provide guidance and a sense of community for those navigating this transition, for those looking for a job, figuring out their next move, or deciding what is most important to them in life. The goal of this podcast is to hear as many stories as possible to provide both inspiration and support for listeners. This can be a stressful time, and the more I discussed this with my peers, I discovered a common thread of uncertainty. Sure, some people have a clear idea of exactly what they want to pursue after school, but oftentimes this transition can be incredibly stressful. I realized that a podcast such as this would be a useful resource for me to hear relatable stories, and the more I discussed it, I realized that I could help out other students as well. I had the idea for this podcast at the beginning of the semester, when the idea of the job search was already stressful enough. Now, amongst the chaos of the pandemic, students are entering a job market with record high unemployment, which is only magnifying the stress at hand. From students having job offers being rescinded to mental health issues that can stem from the anxiety of the current state of the world, this pandemic only convinced me more of the need for such a resource at this time. So, why a podcast? I decided to conduct this project in an interview medium for a few reasons. For starters, the barriers to entry for starting a podcast have never been lower as this field keeps on growing. Also, I found that my target consumer is the primary podcast demographic, and I personally consume podcasts for personal development and entertainment on a regular basis, so I couldn't think of a better way to convey this idea. According to Consumer Reports, 18% of podcast listeners are aged 18 to 24 and are aging into the largest podcast listening demographic, which consists of those aged 25 to 34, which comprises 28% of the market. I view this as an opportunity to gain a listener base within my target demographic. As you can see in this infographic of some educational demographics of podcast listeners, those who listen to podcasts are 56% more likely to be undergraduates, which captures my demographic of students soon to enter the job search. Based off of this data, the podcast space is continually growing amongst college students as an on-the-go resource to complement their busy lives. My competitive analysis showed me that there is a gap in the market for podcasts focusing on college students and recent graduates who are navigating this period in real time. Many shows, such as How I Built This and Career Talk, offer practical advice from established professionals who can give advice in hindsight, but I see an opportunity to capture the feelings and trials of those currently going through this transition. This show strives to focus on capturing the stresses, twists, and turns in the stories of current students and recent graduates. I know so many people who pursued something completely unrelated to their major after school, changed paths, etc. It's easy to see that someone made the right decision to pursue their passion after they are successful. But how did they feel when they started embarking on this journey? Scared? Doubtful? Crazy? This is what I hope to explore through my interviews and gain valuable insight into the many ways life can unfold. This podcast will be recorded on and distributed through using the Anchor app. Anchor is an all-encompassing podcast hosting and analytics app that includes recording, distribution, and sponsorship capabilities. Episodes can be recorded and edited through the app and can match your podcast with potential advertisers. The show will be available through all major podcast providers, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher. Using Anchor, we will be able to track our show's listener base and growth. I plan to recruit potential interviewees through both university and professional channels. I will have a social media presence on LinkedIn and Instagram, and will also be able to be reached through our website as a way to connect with those who want to share their experience. Over time, I plan to eventually seek advertisers who appeal to my target market. I believe that this show would be an ideal place for colleges and job searching platforms such as LinkedIn and Indeed to advertise on, as well as continuing education platforms such as Udemy and Coursera. Using the Anchor app, as our listener base increases, it will match our show with potential advertisers who wish to target our listener base. To start, my plan is to pre-record at least 3 episodes so that I can hint at this content to grow my Instagram following prior to the release of each episode. I will post 3 times a week on Instagram and LinkedIn with snippets of the episode, and I hope to reach out to SUNY New Paltz for them to share this as a resource for students to share their thoughts. I will promote the show through a coordinated Instagram and LinkedIn social media presence. I will host weekly episodes with guests that I interview. I hope to utilize both of these platforms both to promote the show and gain a listener base, and also to connect with interviewees. My goal is to highlight many different paths that students take. Even though we each pursue a different route, there is a piece of advice or comfort that can be gained from hearing each of our individual experiences. I plan to tease each week's guests with a portion of their story and the topics we will be discussing. Here are some examples of sample Instagram posts highlighting the varying stories of interviewees. In this post, I highlight an interview I conducted with a recent graduate who followed a path unrelated to his degree following graduation. He discusses how he realized that finance was not for him and went into the hospitality industry. He also touches upon how conversations with his peers helped him along the way, which is what I hope this podcast can offer to listeners. Here's a quick snippet of my interview with Ben.
I think like any other, 20-something-year-old, early 20s that's about to graduate, you're ready to move on and be in the real world. But obviously, those fears of, not being in a position where you want to be, what did I do wrong in my 4 years looking back on that? But for the most part, I was pretty optimistic and really excited to just, start a career.
One of the main issues I can see my show having moving forward is competition. The podcast base is growing exponentially, and in these trying times, more and more people are creating resources. Graduating students have been talked about greatly during this pandemic, so I could easily see a media company with more funding or resources working on a similar show. Aside from this, I still truly believe in my podcast. Now more than ever, graduates need resources. These are unprecedented times, and hearing from other people who are also going through it serves to connect and inspire one another. My goal for this show is to provide guidance, support, and an outlet as we all take this next step.